Welcome everyone to our most recent LCAAC meeting.
Recording in progress.
Let's try it again. Welcome to our LCAAC meeting. First thing we'll do is open it up for public comment. Do we have any public comments, Ms. Salinas?
At this point, I don't see any public comment, but I ask that within the next 10 minutes, if we do have someone join and raise their hand, I will interrupt and we can go ahead and take public comment at that point.
All right. I see we had someone else join. I don't believe is a regular member.
With the person that just joined, are you here to make a public comment for the LCAAC committee? With the last name Wu? And what we will do is we are live streaming on the Fremont Unified School District website. And so we'll wait 10 minutes if you have a public comment at that point. Otherwise, we will have you off of the group, and then I'll put in the link. I'll put the link in the chat so you can go ahead and watch it live stream, but we'll wait 10 minutes. Okay, Mr. Mostoke, go ahead.
Okay. Mr. Lechner, can you take the roll?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Stephen Musto.
Present.
Ann Dameron.
Present.
Thank you. Vicky Chon.
Present.
Zayan Khan.
Here.
Thank you. Amanda Dang. Kevin Ching. Ian Chen.
Present.
Thank you. Divya Rani Belamkonda. Annie He. Did I say your last name right? Is it he or her?
He. You did perfect.
Okay, thank you so much. Prakash Dasot.
Present.
How did I do with your name, please?
Oh, perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anna Shipper.
Here.
Abhay Kulkarni. Aparna Balamaran. Siddhartha Banerjee.
Here.
Thank you. Larona Jones. Michael Gardner. Christy Rocha.
Here.
Leticia Salinas.
Here.
Nancy Pfeiffer. Trustee Diane Jones.
Trustee Jones is going to be President Jones is going to be a little late. She did message.
Okay. And then Trustee Vivek Prasad, please.
I'm here.
Thank you so much. Mr. Chair, that concludes the roll. Let me just count real quick. I believe we're one short of a quorum.
Okay, well, we'll keep an eye on that. Hopefully someone more joins. And I think at that point, we will then address the minutes. All right. Okay, so we're going to jump into our draft goals if we're not going to be able to look at the minutes from the last meeting. And this is it's an important meeting. So it is now linked on the agenda, but let me put it in the chat as well. And we'll explain what you're looking at. So if you were on the LCAAC last year, we were reflecting our previous LCAAC president, Ms. Burbeck Herrera, did a really good job kind of going through the many different budget numbers. So we want to replicate that this year. What you're looking at here is a spreadsheet of all of our LCAP goals and sub goals by numbers. And if it is in highlight or yellow, that means it is at a different amount than last year. So what we'd like to do is kind of go through each of the goals. Dr. Rocha, Ms. Salinas, and I are here to provide questions if you have any questions about the content, and we'll also provide explanations of where budgets have changed. But what we thought we'd do is go through each goal individually and get your feedback on where you have questions and what your thoughts are. And Dr. Rocha will add a few more details. You have your hand up, so I thought you would.
Oh, yes. Just to give some context. So
This draft that we have is based on all of the feedback that we've received from the community and through multi-layers of engagement that we've received. So direct conversations we've had here at LCAAC with DLAC, which is another advisory committee that we are required to get input with our English learner families and staff. We've had meetings with other educational partners. We've had survey results. So based on that, we started to see themes around what were some of the things that our school community would like to see utilizing these funds. So based on that information, as Mr. Mesto mentioned, there are some, those that are highlighted in yellow are basically additions or some additional new items that we've included in this draft for consideration, as this is what we've heard from the community. So just to give that context.
Thank you. Thank you. So yeah, we've gotten a great deal of input. Obviously, last meeting, we've talked a lot about the parent surveys because that provides a great deal of data that we reference in the LCAP. So without any further ado, are there any questions? I'm going to share my screen so we can maybe look at it more directly. And maybe Ms. Salinas and Dr. Rocha, you could, since I'm sharing my screen, you could see if there's any questions that may come up. Okay, so let's start with goal number 1, which is right here, to provide an educational environment that is conducive to learning. And we have 7 sub-goals underneath this larger goal. Dr. Rocha, do you want to kind of walk through the 3 highlighter yellows, the things that may have changed?
Sure. So as we've talked about in previous LCAAC committees, we've been very fortunate to receive additional funding from the state through kind of these one-time funds for different purposes. In our LCAP for this year, 1.1 is around induction, which is supporting new teachers to the profession, where we have a mentor that supports the new educator. It's a 2-year program, and it really helps to support retention of our educators and supporting them in their first years when they're first starting out as a teacher. We did receive what was a funding source called Educator Effectiveness Block Grants. And through this funding source, induction was one of those programs that could be utilized for that funding. We did get board approval for that. So what you'll see is that in previous years, I believe our budget was around $550,000. And now it has been cut to $50,000, and that is for another program that we support with some of our teachers around the peer assistance review. But that large dollar amount now is moved into the Educator Effectiveness Block Grant. So you'll see that in the notes. So for our committee and just for all purposes, a transparent process, that big ticket item has now moved into another funding source. So that is 1.1. Any questions on that before I move into the other ones? Okay. The other ones that are in kind of peachy, I guess is what you would refer to. Those are the current goal actions that we have in goal 1 around conducive learning environments. So those continue to be there. There is no real change with the exception of 1.5. The dollar amount did increase, and this is again in draft form. What we're looking to do is do a partnership with the Silicon Valley Math Initiative. This is a really great organization that works with districts around mathematics. What we're seeing is that we have our English learners and math can sometimes be challenging in the sense that there is, a lot of language that is required. And so one of the things that we're looking to do is increase that dollar amount so that we would be able to not only do language acquisition and support teacher training around how do you use that language acquisition in English language arts, but also supporting our secondary math teachers around this initiative with the Silicon Valley Math Initiative. We're in talks right now, and we would have some presenters that would really focus on best practices around math and how to support newcomers who are new to the country that have limited English language acquisition, but also and some of our students who are refugees who might not have any formal educational experience or schooling. And so that would really support our math department and support our English learners around that. So that's one significant or one change in that aspect. The other thing is around social emotional. We keep seeing a lot of a theme around that. Especially, the pandemic was very challenging for all parties, and making sure that we're supporting our students, not only on the academic side, but also their social emotional. So this would be some lead teachers at our high schools that would really support the social emotional learning. Through our e-log funds, we've been able to develop wellness centers. So it would really be a partnership between those two big initiatives, and really have teacher leaders to really support that initiative. And then the last one is around technology. As we know, technology, we're infusing more and more technology in our instructional practices. One thing with the pandemic has allowed us to really enhance that and use technology more in the way we instruct our students. Not only
So I believe Dr. Roach is having some connectivity issues. I'll just pick up where she left off. Hopefully she can join a second. But 1.7, as you can expect, we have a lot more technology needs that we did previously. Oh, now you're back, Dr. Rocha.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Did I cut out? I didn't.
Yeah,
realize
you
that.
did. You did. Yeah. So I just was
Okay.
picking up on 1.7.
Okay. Thank you. I don't know where I got cut off. So
I think you were talking about how we're now enhancing with more technology our curricular offerings.
yes, a lot more ability to really enhance the learning environment for students, enhance the teaching that goes along with that. And so there is a big need to provide more technological devices and supports, so that what we're starting to see now too is a lot more of our curricular programs have a lot more technology enhancements that our students would really be able to access with the use of technology. So those are the kind of significant or added changes that we've put in this draft for goal 1 based on the feedback that we've received from our different community groups.
And I see 2 hands up for this section. So we'll start, and I don't know who was first. I'll start with Anna Schipper.
Good evening and thank you. I had a question about 1.2. It shows that on the notes, 3.2 million out of the general fund, and that is for school facilities. For repairs, are we talking about just standard repairs and not necessarily things that were slated from the various bond funds?
That's correct. These would be the usual facility bond. And this is a little confusing, having the school facilities as one of the goals, but that is one of the expectations of the state and the LCAAC.
Okay, and Zion Khan.
Yeah, so this is kind of a general question, but I see at the bottom that the total budget's around 16 million. So is there like potential extra money to be allocated, or has this all been spent, or where we are in terms of the total budget?
We're gonna get to that at the bottom, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
And then Annie Hay.
Questions. One is 1.7 about technology fund. I'm curious how this is going to be allocated throughout the schools? Because the reason I'm asking is I'm also sitting on the Irvington PTSA board, and every time when we have the meeting, we heard from technology teachers that their MacBooks, Chromebooks are outdated, license expired, and scrambles to see how can they get the support. I'm just curious, how is that money going to be distributed, allocated to different throughout the schools to support the technology need?
Well, you are certain. Oh, go ahead, Christy.
So just as a kind of reminder for all of us, so this money that we're discussing is really in terms to support unduplicated students. So students who are either English learners, foster homeless youth, or from socially economically disadvantaged backgrounds. So we've done it various ways where we internally have the unduplicated counts. And so then we are able to provide these services to the school sites. So that is one way that we've done it. We've also looked at different ways. So I think we haven't identified how that process will be. But one thing to note that we do need to make sure that this money principally is serving our unduplicated students. So we do know certain sites have, all sites have unduplicated, but then there are certain sites that have higher numbers than others. So we would have to do an internal review and take a look at that.
That's exactly right, because most students who doesn't have the laptop, borrow those Chromebooks will be that, the students group. Second question is 1.2. See. School facility and maintenance, right, in the good repairs. It sounds as a regular maintenance, but I have seen some schools had, like a little stand-up like umbrella thing to help students cover the lunch area. Some students some schools doesn't have it. The question is how, again, similar question, how's the money being allocated, distributed to the school sites? So, to cover the basics like equity, make sure not equity, but more of like, I've seen some schools has little covers that students, their food has not been destroyed by bird poops here and there, and some schools doesn't have anything covers students sitting on the floor eating lunches.
So to answer that question, what you'll see in 1.2, the allocation there is, it's grayed out, and that is because we cannot use supplemental funds for facilities. However, it is one of the state priorities. So there will be some items as we go through the LCAAC draft, is that those actions are within the LCAAC, but there's no supplemental funds. So this is all general fund allocations that we utilize for the staffing and just the operations of repairing and maintaining our facilities. So I hope that clears that.
Okay, and I see Ann Dameron has her hand up.
Yes, back to 1.7 and using those funds for unduplicated students. One of the challenges that we have is high mobility in elementary. So in the fall, our unduplicated numbers at some sites were low. But as the year goes by, breaks happen, people move, it's the first of the month, etc. Suddenly, in my knowledge, my site, our unduplicated number has gone up. So somehow understanding that there's mobility and that we may need to continue to adjust that number to be able to support students who come into our district and into our schools later in the year, no matter what grade or level. Thank you.
And just a quick thing about technology is that, you've Ms. Hay and talked about Irvington, talking about Chromebooks. This is a conversation that's happening on every campus. You know, Chromebooks were really kind of a revolution in that they were affordable, so you can put a laptop in the hands of kids. Unfortunately, they come with an expiration date, and so we're really struggling as a district to make sure we can replace those that are expiring in the near term. So it's something we think about a lot. Okay. Do we have any other hands, Ms. Salinas?
I think, I'm not sure, Ms. Hay, did you have your hand up for another question, or this, or was it just up?
Sorry, it was an old hand.
Oh, no worries. Anna Shipper?
Okay, another question about 1.7, you know, talking about mobility for students coming into the district or leaving the district throughout the school year. If an unduplicated student has been given the use of a Chromebook, but they're moving out of our district, how do we get that back? I mean, is there a way to account for that? You know, I understand, you know, the influx of new students coming in who may need one, and we've got to adjust for that. How do we adjust for those who are leaving the district, or can we ever do that? I don't know the process. Thank you.
There is a checkout process at schools when students leave. And so I think the expectation would be to turn it in then. There aren't that many Chromebooks that are assigned directly to students. They're usually assigned to teachers' classrooms and accessible there. And so I see Ann Dameron giving me a look too. That's not always the case, but for the most part, maybe that's my secondary experience drawing, but it's for the most part, they're assigned to schools, and schools kind of allocate them within the school. Okay, any other thoughts on goal number 1? Okay, with that, let's move on to goal number 2. Goal number 2 is actually similar in cost to goal number 1. It's increase the academic achievement of all students through challenging and engaging instruction. So I'll let Dr. Rocha go through these again, but this is another one that's impacted by the one of our grants we got from the state.
Okay, so just like in the previous goal, anything in that kind of green color that's not highlighted are our current goals and a continuation of that. So let's talk about specifically 2.3. We are very fortunate in Fremont to have instructional coaches that work directly with teachers and principals at the school sites. Going back to the Educator Effectiveness Block Grant, that was again another expenditure that was allowable to move over. And so that expenditure in this year was, I believe, almost $1 million. And so that's why you see it zeroed out. But it is noting that the coaches were moved into the Educator Effectiveness Block Grant, and that funding is secured basically until 6/30 of 2025. So that's one thing to note for our group. 2.4, just like the facilities one, that is also a general fund expenditure. So that's why it's grayed out and there's no dollar amount, because it's not funded through supplemental funds. And then what we see is 2.7 and 2.8 in this draft. Those are potentially new goals. And 2.7 is the implementation of a district-wide supplemental program to support mathematics. I know at our last LCAAC committee meeting, that was strongly discussed. We currently have Lexia and Reading Plus. Reading Plus is for our secondary students, and Lexia is for the elementary. So we're looking to find something comparable like Lexia or Reading Plus, but this would serve mathematics. So that is what you would see in 2.7, so that we would have both supplemental programs to support both math and ELA instruction. And the other thing is 2.8, and this is around establishing innovative practices and programs to improve academic outcomes. One of the things that we've have seen in some of the feedback is that some of our school sites are really excited about potentially having a theme or a magnet of some sort. Not only would it attract and recruit students as far as enrollment, but also would allow for some of our elementary sites, and it could be secondary as well. We do have some magnets in our district, these Spanish and Mandarin immersion, the Irvington, arts block, or I might be butchering that. Kennedy has, thank you. The Kennedy also has the green, what is that, Mr. Musto?
Green technologies.
Green technology, thank you. I'm like not remembering these at the moment. And so this would allow for some of our sites to really kind of explore that, look at some maybe thematic kinds of things to really do some innovative practices. We've had some sites discuss about expanding upon, doing project-based learning, or maybe doing a computer science strand or something like that. And so that is what 2.8 is around. So I'll stop there.
All right. Who has questions about our goals and sub-goals for number 2? Okay. With that, I'm going to move on to goal 3. And we talk about goal 3 and goal 4, the dollar amounts get much higher, and we'll try to walk you through where that comes from because it's mostly staff members. So goal number 3 is implement strategies to involve students in their learning and interventions to eliminate barriers to success. It's a long goal. We have 11 sub-goals for that. And Dr. Rocha, why don't you walk us through our highlighted ones?
And Dr. Rocha, before you get started, I wanted to give further context to this area. This is something that I really appreciate about the Fremont Unified School District LCAAC, is that what we heard time and time again within last year's feedback, this year's feedback, is the need to really remove barriers for students. And because we're dealing with primarily our unduplicated student population, we heard from our community that there was a lot of support in this area that was needed. Absolutely the academics, and we saw that in the other goals, but here we start to see a lot more of the direct services to students and having students in front of them that are supporting, if it's either through social emotional learning or if it's through counseling, newcomer support. So I'll just kind of give that context and I'll let Christy go ahead and take it away.
Okay, so 3.2 is, I know we've talked about this again at the beginning of the year. We as a district are really trying to respond to the whole child, and the MTSS, or the multi-tier systems of support, is really a framework. And we are very fortunate to develop our framework as a local context for our students and our needs, to address any academic, behavioral, or social emotional needs for our students. So we're really building our FUSD MTSS framework. What you're going to see in this is that there's a few additional things that were put in the draft. Traditionally, our sites have received pass-through funding for interventions, and again, can intervene in a range of things of academics, behavior, or social emotional needs. We also have secondary sections to address that as well. We have been, for now, I would say 2 years, initiative around positive behavior interventions and supports, PBIS, for some of you might have heard that acronym, and restorative practices. So we have funding around that for the professional development and to continue to move that initiative forward. We have a Native American program studies, and so providing additional funding for our Native American students to really target and provide those interventions that are needed. And what you'll see that is added this in this particular draft, or in this draft, is behavioralists. Again, what we've seen over and over and over from the input and the feedback that we've received is really the need for a specialized personnel to support students with behavioral needs. And this would be someone who is highly skilled, who is studied in this, and to really help students as we know, sometimes behavior can get in the way of academics and can be a barrier. And so this would be really to address those needs, to help students kind of work through some behavioral needs, develop individual plans and goals, and really support our educators and our principals around around students who might have some significant behavioral needs, but still being able to access the academics. So this is what we've seen time and time again this year from the feedback. And this would allow us to have essentially a team of behavioralists that would be able to respond and support our school staff with students who have those needs. 3.5 is the direct services for English learners. So again, from the feedback we've heard from LCAAC, from DLAC, this would increase, so we would have more ELD specialists at our elementary sites. Some of our sites are at 50% or more, and so that would really be able to have this kind of team approach of supporting our English learners and really pinpointing and being targeted around supporting our school sites that have a higher need. 3.7 is something that we've done in the past, but you'll see an increase in the dollar amount. So we've always been fortunate to be able to provide PSAT testing for our students, our unduplicated. What you'll see in this particular action is also an additional cost so that we can offset the cost for AP tests for our unduplicated students. For those of you who have any secondary students, you know, those costs, if a student's taking 1 or 2 tests, they can add up very quickly. So we would be able to basically pay for those AP tests for our unduplicated students. And then everything else is pretty much a continuation of what we currently have.
So I see some hands. First, Mr. Banerjee, and then Vicky Chan, and then Anna Shipper.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, my question is about the item number 3.2 and how is that different from 3.10? I understand those who have IEPs have a separate support system, and the MTSS with behavioral and social emotional interventions is a separate system. Is it going to act like a separate system, or is it going to, I'm just trying to figure out how is that going to work out together. Thanks.
Yeah, so I'll start and then I'll have Christy wants to add to it. So 2 separate systems, but if we can look at it in terms of the MTSS model is the preventive part of our work. This is where we want to make sure that before a student is referred to the most restrictive type of services or environment, we are attempting to intervene and give the student support in the areas that they need, if it's academic or social emotional. So in that respect, it is a bit different. The behaviorists, for example, that we're looking at, what we heard from the sites is that at this point, we have behaviorists that can only support special education students. And what the request was, behaviorists that can help to support a general education student that at this point may just need a behavior plan, or coaching for a teacher who is really grappling with how to address some very specific needs. And a specialist such a behaviorist can support that classroom teacher before the student is referred to the most restrictive environment. I don't know, Christy, if you want to add something else to that.
Yeah, how we look at it, or just in education in general, it's kind of like a tiered system. So everybody gets the bottom tier. And then what we see in research is that 80% of our students respond to that tier 1. And then of that 80%, there's 20%. And then that second group, again, is kind of giving a second layer of support. And then at that point, you know, most of our students will respond at that tier 2. And then there's a very small group as you go up that kind of pyramid or that tier, where you might have anywhere between, I don't know, say, you know, 5% or so. And again, in that tier 3 support, that's a more kind of intense intervention that you're providing. In general, then students respond to that, and that's fine. How MTSS and say special ed, there's the intersection, is that for those students in that top tier, that even though we've done all of these multiple interventions of some sort and still is not sufficient, then a student might be referred to and looked and then determine, do they need to go into the special ed route? But again, as Ms. Salinas has mentioned, it's really a preventive measure that we are doing everything that we can to respond to the needs of our students before we move into special ed.
Thanks. Quick, and this is the students who have IEP are not restricted to sites that are only for special ed, but also general setting, if you will, like general sites. And that's where I'm like thinking of how is that going to be separate, because students with IEPs may be in the general ed setting, so to speak, while they have the IEPs and special eds. And in that case, how is that going to be separate? Like, is there a behavioral intervention will come in place in place of IEP, or is it going to be just trying to figure out what will be the service and what will be the changes that, I mean, from this kind of budget, is there going to be some help? And yeah.
So nothing will supersede an IEP. An IEP is a legal document that basically is something that a committee of the school community comes together with the parents, and it's based on, you know, different disabilities of some sort that has gone through that process. As you mentioned, there are special ed students. We do not have a special ed school per se. The only, I would say, maybe to say that is Glencler Preschool, but otherwise our special ed students are embedded in all of our school sites. So we don't have a special ed elementary or middle or high school as such as that. So all of our students, regardless if they have an IEP or not, would receive an access to restorative practices per se, which is one of our initiatives, or PBIS, or they might see, they might be invited through the site's pass-through funds for some intervention. So they would as well receive that. But again, that would be as part of the kind of large school group. The IEP is something that is specific for that particular child. So the IEP would be more targeted based on what the learning disability of such would be, what are those IEP goals, and how they're making progress. So so students with an IEP would benefit this, but then they also need an addition, and that would be through their IEP service.
Thank you.
Next, I think was Vicky Kwan.
Yeah, I just had a question about 3.2 and 3.7. So would our intervention teachers, is that going to be coming out of this budget? And then where is that?
So intervention teachers are funded through ELOG currently, and because ELOG was extended, but that is something that we are anticipating in not this school year, but the following school year at this time next year, to be mindful of that dollar amount could potentially increase, because that's where we would put our intervention teachers as part of that MTSS model.
Okay, great. And then the 3.7 and adding more ELD specialists to elementary sites. Is this more going to be like our instructional coaches where they're focused in attendance areas or specific regions, or would it be ELD specialists that are going to be just at one site?
They would be ELD specialists at a school site. So they're providing direct services. So for example, today I was with one of our ELD specialists who was working with TK and kinder students on language acquisition goals based on ELD. So
Okay,
They're
great.
very
And that would be like kinder classes at like 2 or 3 schools, or like, or just at one school?
one site. So
One
they
site.
focus on, they work with the educators at the site because of course they can't provide all of the ELD services, but we look at newcomers who are potential long-term English learners. If there is a particular grade level that is, say, has a lot of English learners, they work directly with the teachers and the students and the families, quite frankly, as well as providing, they do everything ELD essentially.
Okay, great. And I think that is a, that's awesome, just because then that teacher, essentially is able to form better relationships with the students and with the educator and just give that full support. So, happy to hear that it's at one site. So awesome. Thank you. That's all I had.
Then Anna Shipper.
I had a question about 3.1. It says high needs high school support. So can you give us some examples of what we be doing or offering with that?
Oh, go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, that's actually pretty straightforward. It is support for Kennedy High School, and it is support for their block schedule. A block schedule has a lot of advantages, and students are able to make up more classes and more selections, but it does cost more to the district. So we're incurring some costs there. In addition, it's for Kennedy to hire one additional administrator than they currently are allocated for.
Okay, thank you very much.
Annie Hay.
Just a very quick question. I'm curious, how many behavioral specialists in the FUSD at this time? And with this funding, proposed funding, how many more are we planning to add?
So we currently do not have any behaviorists that are available for students outside of special ed. So we have 0. So what this would allow for us to have a team that would be able to support our students who are not been identified and gone through the process and have an IEP.
And I think the
Thank
cost here is about, I think we're looking at 3 on this. Yeah.
That is correct.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Zion Khan.
Yeah, just the Kennedy block schedule reminded me of something. Basically, I think in general, from talking to Kennedy students, they like the block schedule, but one thing that they bring up every time is how if they take AP classes in first semester, it's like a lot on them in second semester to handle like relearning a lot of that content for first semester, and then on top of the APs that they're taking second semester already. So I know that's not necessarily just unduplicated students, but I think it's something that should try to support those students in some way, whether it be extra hours for them to meet with teachers, even if they only have them first semester, or additional resources that could help them study, just to help them ease that studying period.
That's interesting. Thank you for that suggestion.
Let's put that in the notes. That's good.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I think Annie's hand's still up from last time. Yes. Okay. So let's go on to the next section. If there's no more questions for the goal 3.
Okay, so we're going to go on to goal 4 number now, and this is establish partnerships with our families and community to increase academic success for all students. This is actually our biggest ticket item of all the goals, and we'll see a lot of staffing associated with this. Last year, this is where we were able to add additional counselors support, and we'll see a lot of that continue. So and that was, of course, in addition to ELOG funds as well. So Dr. Rocha, you want to talk about especially 4.6?
Sure. So this goal is around, as Mr. Musto mentioned, partnerships with our families and really supporting them. As previous goals, anything that is, I guess now this is more of an orange color, would be goals that we have in our current budget. What you'll see in 4.6 is establishing MFTs or marriage family counselor therapists who would be able to then provide therapeutical services for individual students or groups of students. And so what it is a little bit different than 4.5. 4.5 is our TK through 12th grade counselors. Our elementary and secondary do a great job and help with academics and support sometimes when a student might be in crisis. But with our MFTs or marriage family therapists, they are licensed. And so they would really be able to provide more of that therapeutical services for students that our counselors do not. And that's just based on credentialing and things like that. So this is really kind of taking it to provide more kind of direct pinpoint services for students who might need that. So that's what you'll see in 4.6. And just to kind of provide that context of how 4.5 and 4.6 is different. But what we see time and time again is the need to maintain and to continue to provide counseling services, therapy for our students. So again, that is why you see 4.6 in the draft based on the feedback that we've had. Just to kind of go over quickly the other goals, 4.4, that is what we've had again in our current LCAP. The dollar amount has changed a little bit there, but what this would allow is to have bilingual staff who are able to support families when they're enrolling in the school district, providing parent workshops, things like that. So it's a variety of staffing that are either cultural, have had a lot of training around culturally responsive or bilingual staff. We would continue with our parent workshops as, again, that was a big feedback, the need to continue to provide that. Cost is a coordination of services where our school sites have a cost coordinator, and that's when they work with other agencies within the city and across the county to really support students' needs if they have any, for example, if say a family is experiencing some homelessness, how can the school work with our different agencies and really provide those supports. So the cost not only serves on the academic sides, but really helps any families that might be experiencing something. And the great thing about that is bringing in our community partners to help our families. And then the last one, 4.1, is around student support services that does an amazing job around our school culture and climate. This also has money for the web program for our junior highs. We know the transition, and this came up, the transition from elementary to middle and even middle to high. There's a need to make sure that students are connected, and we know that our students and sometimes our families are a little nervous around that. So it's building that inclusive kind of culture around that. It's also, we have a social worker that is funded within 4.1, again, kind of falling in line with the cost and all of that, providing any additional services or connecting families to agencies that might need some additional support. So that kind of concludes goal 4.
And I see Mr. Banerjee, you have a question?
Yeah, thank you so much. This is great. Thank you very much for actually showing us this. Quick question on this, so for example, 4.6, this is a new item based on what I'm hearing. So is it like how many therapists or associate therapists or how number of hours, for example, that will add? Will that be sufficient for the needs that we have identified? And I'm just trying to understand how we come up with this fund, the numbers, and whether that's sufficient. Thanks.
Yes, and I'll have Chrissy speak to the cost, but I want to give a little bit more context. So what we found this year is that we tapped the shoulders of a lot of community partners, and they, like many other entities were having a hard time to really recruit a lot of these folks. So then our student support services, Mr. Bailey, in talking with his team, really realized that one of his program managers, Jenna Atencio, I think that's how I pronounce her last name, she is able to actually be the support and the mentor to these associates. So in some respect, we're going to kind of grow our own within it. And so at this point, you know, there's certainly a cost that's there. We were looking within a budget, within this budget line, and I think this was it 3 or 4, Christy?
It was 4.
4. And these 4 associates would be our employees, so they would be working here in the district, so they would not be just coming in, you know, limited hours. They would be our full-time employees, and they would work under the guidance of a student support services and where the need is in terms of providing this direct counseling to students.
Thank you so much. So is it like a new positions? Basically, you're bringing in jobs for this to support the family therapist. Okay.
Yes, it would be. They would be new positions for us in the new employees for us in the district. Yes.
Thank you so much. And is it also like available for our teachers? This is not like mental health is not just for the students, also for the teachers. Thanks.
With this particular funding source, it's all direct services for students in that aspect. I mean, teachers do get direct support around professional development. We would have to do some more inquiry around would an MFT be able to provide that service for teachers, because again, the funding's for unduplicated students.
Thanks.
So as we get to the bottom there, we see the total budget for this year and the projected budget for next year. And there is a difference of a little over $300,000. At this point, we have not calculated the step and column increases. So if you're a community member, what step and column means is that all of FUSD employees are on a step and column, and with more years up to a certain point, you move to the right of the column and your salary increases. So that will probably end up taking up this difference. That being said, last year, our budget for the LCAP increased, had a nice little bump between this meeting and towards the end. So the state could come in and give us some more money. So that's a possibility. But right now we're thinking that's all going to be taken by step and column.
And Mr. Musto, we have another hand.
Oh, yes.
Prakash.
So in the context of this goal number 4, just wanted to provide sort of a suggestion there. I sit on the board of a nonprofit which sort of connects at-risk youths to the mentors. I'd be happy to connect you with the CEO there. I'm just copying the website of the nonprofit. So we are actually working with several unified districts in the Bay Area. So maybe that might be helpful as well.
Yeah, feel free to send that information to myself and to Dr. Rocha, Ms. Salinas, and I. But you actually said the question I was going to ask is if you're working in other districts, because whenever you bring in someone from the outside, it kind of goes through every department, it takes a lot of checks and things, but it could be done. So we'd be happy to look into that.
Yeah, I mean, so like we are providing services to the other school districts, but it's an independent organization.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if we've had a mentorship program, but we could have in the past. But yeah, I'd be happy to look at it. Sounds interesting.
Sure.
Okay, I think at this point, it would be lovely if as we're looking through these 4 goals, is there any other notes of something that we may have missed or something that needs clarification or really other suggestions? I'm going back to like Zion Khan's suggestion. So those kinds of things. Okay, so I see Ann Dameron.
One of my questions, I think, is 3.6. which is the high need elementaries? Yeah, 3.6 Blake Howe is the one that caught my eye. I believe we're having some changes in the focus at that school in coming years. So how would that change the focus of 3.6's funding?
So this has happened in the past too. We constantly are monitoring our unduplicated counts. And so currently these are our elementaries that have over 50%. Say in the context that a school, because of the unification for the immersion program, if the unduplicated count drops, then a school would be eliminated. And so we've done that in the past. And if you remember, Durham used to be a high needs, and then we removed that. So I monitor that.
Okay, Trustee Prasad?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that Surfboard E, through our student board member, Tushar, has sent some write-up from their conversations with students and their peers about sort of mental health and the supports needed. Well, a component of that is mental health and support needed. So we should bring that here as well to see for some of the goals on this list, that student feedback is critical. So we should incorporate in our plan.
Yeah, I think the student feedback, there's a part of the LCAP plan where you talk about community engagement, and that will fit very well within that section.
And the marriage family therapist would also be able to support the mental health needs. So there are definitely elements within the social emotional learning that students would receive. And then the marriage family therapist would be able to provide those direct services for our unduplicated students.
And Anna Shipper?
Thank you. Following on Ann Dameron's point on 3.6, we do have a new school coming online. And I'm wondering if we're finding that there's some students there that need help. How quickly can they get put on to, receiving extra services like on 3.6? Because I don't know the process of adding a new school. This is kind of new for me as well. Thank you.
So Bringhurst is already in the plans based on some demographic data that we have. We don't anticipate Bringhurst to be considered a high needs school based on the internal documents and just demographic data. We know who is basically registered for Bringhurst, and so we don't anticipate they would be in 3.6. But they would still receive support in pass-through for intervention and library funds and everybody else. So we've already accounted for the new school.
Okay. And if I could add, I think that's, oh, go ahead, Anna, sorry.
I know that a lot of the elementary schools have their own counselor. Does a lot of the Bringhurst, are they getting their own counselor as well?
Yes, they will be getting a counselor and an intervention specialist, just like the rest of the schools.
Fabulous, thank you.
Ann Dameron.
If we could go back up to goal number 1 and then action 1.4, which is the opportunities for all instructional staff. Can you clarify how the paraprofessionals that are going to be needed for TK classes, are they covered out of LCAP? Does that roll over into ELOP, some other funding? Because we do see, as we know, we are needing to hire lots of new people as everything is changing, and there's a definite need for training.
That is actually in the Educator Effectiveness Block Grant. So we're very fortunate to have kind of all these little pots, and they all kind of blend together, or as what we say in the federal side, the braid and blend the funds together. So that's where that would be.
Okay, great. And I think, going kind of building on what Chrissy just said. I think this is a very unique opportunity, and but I think what's important is to always continue to note, for example, our teachers, our intervention teachers, and where they are. And although we may have different funding sources, just continuing to see how it's still meeting the goal of the district. So I think that'll be important to outline in the LCAP as well. Mr. Lechner.
Thank you, Ms. Salinas. Ms. Salinas, I'd like to take a moment to thank Dr. Rocha and also our chair, Mr. Musto, for their hard and dedicated work. It's unclear to me how anybody on this committee or in our community would be able to comply with the state requirements for this without your extraordinary contribution today. Thank you so much. And throughout the rest of the year. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think, on that line also, thank you to all of you. I mean, I'm sure it takes just a lot of your support to be able to run these meetings. And as we had said at the very, very beginning of the year, you were all representative of parents and teachers and community members. And so we do appreciate the time. We know this takes time with your family. So we do appreciate the time you're spending with us as well. So I'll give this back to Mr. Musto.
All right. This is going back to earlier business, but do we happen to have a quorum, Mr. Lechner?
I'm sorry to say, Mr. Chair, that I don't think we do.
Yeah, I was afraid of that. So, well, with that in mind, I believe we've reached the end of our agenda. Is there anything anyone wants to share for the good of the order? Ms. Salinas?
Yes, just we will make sure we get lots of reminders out for next time. We're hoping to bring a draft of this plan to you all. We basically have shared it with you, but we're chugging along with what we have to do in terms of being compliant. Speaking what Mr. Lechner had said earlier, this has to go to the board for a public hearing, first meeting in June, and then a final adoption at the end of June, along with the budget for the district. So it's going to be a pretty important meeting the next time we meet in May. So we'll continue to get that out to all of you. Also, I think at the end of that meeting, it will be very important to check in as a suggestion that we look for replacing of members, because I know we have some members, and I'm trying to get that data together. We have some members who have excused absences, and I'll be able to share that with Mr. Lechner and Mr. Musto. But I think it'll also be a time to see where our vacancies are, so we can start to do a call for members for next year. Some of you are on 2-year terms, some of you are on what? I think you've got a year left. Well, we've got to look at all of that. So we'll reserve some time for that as well. I see Ms. Chan's hand up.
Yeah, I just have a quick question. On our agenda, we have a meeting in italics for April 13th and then a meeting for May 3rd. So is April 13th just the board meeting that's noted on there?
Yes, I think that's a typo. So originally, if you remember, if you've been on this committee before, we used to have an annual update, and the state said, don't get comfortable. We're going to do the mini LCAP or the supplemental to the LCAP. So we won't need that April 13th meeting for the board as presenting anything. So instead, we've already done that in February, I believe. So it will just be our May meeting. So we'll be sure to correct that on the agenda moving forward.
Okay, sounds good.
All right. With that, are there any last comments, last words? All right. Well, thank you again. We will make sure to get those meeting reminders out there, but we're going to get that quorum for the last meeting, next meeting, sorry. Anyway, thank you very much, and we'll see everyone May 3rd.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you.